Hey guys, DMS here. Today I have for you the Drop THX AAA One. Let's check it out. Now do me a favor, if you want to see more videos like this, click that subscribe button down below. If you want to support the channel and ask me questions directly, you can on the Telegram chat, or you can get active in the community on Hi-Fi Guides. This is a $200 amplifier. It is another THX drop amp like the AAA 789, but this is the AAA One linear. Like the 789, it's pretty simple, and it's about the same form factor, but not quite as tall. This is a relatively thin amp as far as height is concerned. This is a 6.3 millimeter jack, or quarter-inch stereo single-ended jack right here for comparison. On the back, we have RCA in, RCA out, and a DC 30-volt 0.4 amp barrel plug. So you can use this as a preamp. You can only run this with RCA DACs. And on the front, we have our power switch, our preamp switch to switch between the preamp output on the back. When you do that, the headphone jack turns off, and then you switch back, the RCA on the back turns off, and then you're just using headphones. Our 3 gain stages, and then our volume for our headphone output or for the pre on the back. This is a very well-built amplifier. The 789 was a well-built amplifier, but this one is too. The feet are very solid, the sticky is not coming off, they have a lot of good grip. The whole chassis is very solid all the way around, no sacrifices on the construction. The only weak point of the build is that the potentiometer feels kind of crappy. There's a lot of friction as it turns. You feel something kind of rubbing. But that is the only weak point on the entire build of this device, is the feeling of this potentiometer. Gain switch feels great. Power switch, pre-switch, everything feels great. The one thing that I wonder about the build is why it's in a chassis of this size. Here's the actual chassis that the amp comes in, and there's the amp. Look at that. They could fit this whole thing into something the size of a JDS Atom or a Shit Magni. There is not a lot happening in here. They definitely could have gone with better caps. A few things are cut corners, but overall, this isn't bad. The weakest thing I see in this build again is this little potentiometer right here. Those are not the best solder joints that I've ever seen, but they don't seem to be posing any problems. Let's throw this thing back together and talk about sound. Now the 789 is the same way. It's a relatively large chassis for the number of components inside. You could fit everything on the 789 in just a little corner, but it doesn't take up a huge footprint. It's not like a giant speaker amp or something. So how does it sound? What can it power? Well, this puts out 1.5 watts at 16 ohms, but about 2.7 watts at 32 ohms, and then goes down from there as you increase in impedance. 2.7 watts at 32 ohms means that most things are going to be able to be powered by this amplifier. If you really like to crank your 600 ohm headphones, you might run into a little bit of a headroom problem, but with my custom Dyna V2s, I could get this on gain stage 3 to about 2/3 volume before it would get above my comfortable listening levels, and that is not an easy headphone to drive. What I'm saying is that power-wise, this handled basically everything I would throw at it, and it really comes down to what your sound preferences are. The THX 789, its bigger balanced brother, suffered from the problem of being a bit harsh sounding. Now, it's a very clean, very clinical amplifier with very low distortion numbers, but everything always sounded dry, it always sounded harsh, and it didn't always sound transparent to the DAC. This, though, I'm pleased to say, isn't quite the same. It is a little bit harsh at times, but not nearly as much in the treble regions as the 789. It is still dry, but it can be saved by a good DAC. And at $200, what this amp does and its amount of transparency to the DAC is honestly pretty good. It's pretty competitive. If you're an absolute bass head, you're probably not going to like the dryness of this amplifier. And if you like classic rock and like big, warm sounding, powerful amps, well, this has the power, but it's not going to deliver that warmth that you're after. I tried this with a lot of DACs, and the Socrus 1321, which I've said in the past is one of my favorites, paired very, very well with this amp. It brought back a little bit of that warmth and a little bit of body that I felt like it was missing. And the dry low end of the amp ended up turning into what felt more like a rich to neutral sound. Now granted, that is a more expensive DAC, but the fact that this amplifier was able to scale to that more expensive DAC, I feel like is a testament to the amp's ability. And from someone who's not normally a fan of the THX amps, I actually like the AAA One. Now, I don't use it all the time. My go-to amp at home is still my A90 and the tube amps. Granted, I do use some other things, a Broadway S, the JDS Labs EL2, the Atom, several other things. But there have been many weeks where I've set this up as my primary amplifier, used it, and had no complaints, and I'll go to pick up a headphone with a balanced plug, I'm about to plug in and go, oh, I'm not using my A90, I forgot, because it does very well. The noise floor is practically non-existent, it doesn't get that hot. It's just a good, solid amplifier at $200. Cheap amps are getting really good. And I think if you paired this with an R2R, maybe the Arist R2R actually, that's a bit more of a budget R2R option. I imagine these would sound well together and the form factor is kind of similar. Or if you were to use this in conjunction with say maybe a tube pre between the DAC and this that could add some flavor to it, I like it. And actually, I think that this could be a decent amplifier for some people that are into vinyl. Really depending on the cartridge you have, if you have a record player and a cartridge that leans towards a warmer sound, it'll warm the amp up. Or if you have something with a lot of clarity and a bit of brightness to it, I feel like that'll also translate right through since this is so transparent to the source. And vinyl, being such an excellent source for a very organic sound, I feel like would really pair well with how clinical this amp can be at times. I feel like those two sounds would balance each other out and create something that is pretty special. I've used this with my turntable, which has a Nagalka MP110, which is a slightly darker, warmer and mid-range focus cartridge, and they sound great together. At that point, it really depends on the headphones that I'm using. I think this sounded pretty good with some Bayers. I didn't quite enjoy it as much with my 6XX. I think if you have a 6XX, there's other options on the market that are a little bit better. But I used it with the Aeon Noir, the Focal Celeste. I used it with the HD800S, and it sounded fine. We're getting to the point in amplifiers where it's getting harder to justify really expensive amps unless you're going to really expensive amps. And sure, there's a difference there, but it depends on how far you want to go. For many people, if you have this in a good DAC, or an A90 in a good DAC, or an Atom in a good DAC, you're set for a pretty good while. And it isn't that often now that I see amps that I really have a lot negative to say about because, like I said, cheap amps are just getting good. Modhouse Argon, yes, it can power it, but you'll be better off with something that has a little bit more wattage overhead, not necessarily for volume, but just to get a little bit more control over that diaphragm. Things like Elex and DT8 8600 ohm are fine on this, though the 600 ohm, you're not going to completely blast your ears off with it, but it's still more loud than I would ever want to listen to. I used this with my Abyss and it powered them just fine, though I do benefit from those on a nicer amp. The same goes with the Aeon Noir. Aeon Noir, this powered very easily, but I did feel like the Aeon Noir was a little bit better on the topping A50S, but that's just because the topping A50S has a bit more of a powerful bass response than this does, and that headphone's main advantage is its extremely well done, well extended sub bass. But this could power it. Sundara would be fantastic with this amplifier. But if you were to go a little bit higher in price, I think the Sundara is just a little better with the JDS EL2. Interestingly enough though, the EL2 has better bass, but this is actually a little bit smoother on the highs than the EL2 is. And at this price point, that's the big competitor that this has to go against, is the $50 more JDS EL2, which if bass is something that's extremely important to you, the EL2 is probably going to be a better choice. But if you want really smooth highs, while this amp is generally more clinical, the highs are going to be more smooth on it. So there you go, drop THX AAA One. Pretty good little amp. That gets the thumbs up from me, and I think I'm going to wrap up this video. So guys, I hope you liked this video. If you did, please leave a like down below, a comment letting me know what you want to see in the future. If you want to get active in the community, you can at forum.hifiguides.com. And as always, don't forget to stick around and subscribe for more videos like this in the future. Till next one, guys. Peace.